Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Lewis Clark, aka Sonic Yoda from the website SEGADriven, back again with another collection video for your viewing pleasure. This time we're going to focus on the Sega 32X. Now, I think we better explain why I even own this thing, because yeah, it's not a console you want to own, really. So the reason behind owning a 32X pretty much stems from wanting to own this. So this is Knuckles Chaotix. It is a Sonic the Hedgehog spin-off that is exclusive to the console, and being a massive Sonic fan that I am, I needed to own it. So we went hunting for a 32X. So what happened at the time was that PAL 32Xs and PAL copies of Knuckles Chaotix were bloody expensive, and actually still are. So what happened was the cheapest option to get a console and a game was, at the time, there was a bundle deal. Someone was selling a Mega Drive, a Genesis 32X, which is an American one, and an American copy of Knuckles Chaotix, which you can see here. So that was the most affordable option that I had for me at the time, so I went for it. Lo and behold, the Mega Drive that it came with is actually modded, and that allows the machine to be able to play an American 32X and an American version of Knuckles Chaotix. So let me go and show you what the machine looks like, and then you can get an idea as to what we're dealing with here. So here is the modded Mega Drive. Now it's a Japanese model, Model 1 Mega Drive, and as you can see down here we have two dip switches. The top one controls the refresh rate, so 50 Hz and 60 Hz, and the bottom one changes it from NTSC to PAL. So using a combination of the two switches you can basically play anything from any region you want, and it also works with hardware. So here is the collection. Now, not many games, but then again there's not many games available for this console. It's funny that I actually went with the American 32X because it appears that most of the games are only available in the States, or at least there's more exclusives there. But yeah, so let's just have a quick look through what we've got here. So there's Knuckles Chaotix, the game I got the system for. I actually really enjoy it. It's the controls and the gameplay can be a little bit difficult to get into straight away, but once it clicks, you can generally enjoy it a lot better, and it's probably one of the biggest Sonic games there is. Despite not actually having Sonic the Hedgehog in it. But yeah, I really enjoy it. Shadow Squadron is one of my favourites, actually. This is very similar to Star Wars Arcade in that it's a space shooter, but yeah, an original IP and something really interesting and worth playing. And yeah, I'm running out of things to say. So yeah, but it's definitely a good game, and I would recommend it if you're looking for things to play on your 32X. Tempo is a great platformer, actually. A bit clunky, but it's got a nice graphical style. It's very cartoony. I love the sprites and the animation. Good soundtrack as well, actually. Yeah, just an overall kind of a decent platformer, and I'd recommend it if you've got a 32X. T-Mech is one of my rarities. It's sort of like a arena shooter where you pilot little spaceships and go around trying to kill each other. Not brilliant, it's got to be said, but like I say, one of the rarer consoles, one of the rarer games on the console, and you can expect to pay in upwards of £50, I think, for this now. So if you see it going cheap, definitely recommend it, because you might be in for a good investment there. Blackthorn's actually really interesting. It reminds me of Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey, in that it's a sort of thoughtful platformer with action elements, and it's a lot slower paced, and just generally something quite unique. There's not really much I can compare it to be honest with you. I'd really recommend that if you can find a copy. But yeah, that's quite interesting. Calibri's absolutely mental. It's made by the same people that do Echo the Dolphin, so Nova Trade, and you play as a hummingbird, and it's a 2D shoot 'em up. Yeah, figure that one out. It's all right. It's not a great game. It's not a bad game. It's generally just an all right game. But because it's so bizarre, it earns points in that regard. So yeah, an interesting title. I would definitely look at some footage of it if you have never seen it in action. So now on to the Q&A. So first up we have a question from Hella Doherty, who asks me what my favourite 32X game is aside from Knuckles Chaotix. Virtua Racing Deluxe. Here's the daddy. I absolutely love Virtua Racing, as Sega Arcade Racers Go, it's probably my favourite, even over Daytona USA. Now, don't get me wrong, Daytona USA is a great game, but there's something away it handles that kind of gets on my nerves a little bit. It's very, for an arcade game, the handling is incredibly realistic. So you've really got to stamp on the brakes and pull the steering wheel over to get into a drift, and collisions and getting off road and stuff generally slow the car down a lot. And you've got to be pretty precise if you want to be winning anything on Daytona USA. Whereas virtual racing is a lot more arcadey and a lot more forgiving, so it generally appeals to me more. Now, I love the Mega Drive version with the Sega Virtual Processor. It works great. Pretty low res, but it functions fine, and it's very quick actually compared to the other versions. But this version is probably the best that exists up until the release of Sega Classics Collection, which has a Sega Ages re-release with lots of added vehicles and some added polish to the graphics and more tracks and just generally more stuff to do. But this was doing that way before the Sega Ages version. So there are two other vehicle types, a stock car and I think it's like a concept-y looking prototype deal. So I think there's either 2 or 1 additional course, but generally it's an expanded version of the arcade release and plays great. So next up, we've got a question from Gareth Spriggs, who I'm pretty sure is joking when he asks, why does it exist in relation to the 32X? Now, knowing that he's joking, I think I'll tie this question in with Titan's Creed question, which is why. What was the original thinking behind releasing the 32X? So it's basically a case of bringing the arcade experience home. Sega during this time were massive in the arcade, but the reason why it's an add-on, as I mentioned slightly in the previous video, was that there's already a massive install base for the Mega Drive. So having all those people that already owned the previous console, it's easier to sell them an add-on because they don't have to invest in an entirely new console. The problem is the 32X was priced as a full, console, full standalone console, so it didn't work, and hence why there wasn't a lot of support for it, and simply because it was too expensive, and it wasn't offering the huge generational leap that you got with the Saturn and the PlayStation, and I think people were expecting more at the time. So there you go. Okay, next question. Zach Rodriguez asks us, would you like to have ever seen Sonic Mars become complete? Now, let's explain what Sonic Mars is first, just in case people don't know. Sonic Mars is the prototype for Sonic Extreme, which would have been the big Sonic game released on the Sega Saturn. Sonic Mars was being developed for the 32X, and there's actually some prototype footage of it kicking around, which you can watch now. Yes, I would have loved to have seen Sonic Mars complete and in a playable state, because I'm a Sonic fan. These things are big for me. But the important thing is the connection to Sonic Extreme. Sonic Extreme is that game for me. It's the one I've always wanted to play in any sort of form. There's been a huge fan gaming movement to actually create a working Sonic Extreme fan game, which is essentially what Sonic Extreme would have been. And I'm hugely supportive of that, and I'd love to see someone actually do that at some point, because that would essentially give me the closest thing to actually being able to play Sonic Extreme for real. And yeah, it's that game for me. It's on such a high pedestal. I'd love to be able to play it, and the fact that it never got released, and it just makes it more attractive to me. And from all the prototype footage and stuff that's available online, it just looks really, really unique. And in a strange way, the fisheye lens almost gives it a sort of precursor to things like Super Mario Galaxy with the round planets. It's just really, really unique, and I'm sure Sonic Mars, being developed by the same team, prior to that had some interesting ideas as well, and I'd love to be able to see or play what was available. So yeah, I definitely would have loved to have seen Sonic Mars complete. Okay, next question. Sega Nerds ask us, do you have Virtua Fighter for the 32X, and how does it compare to the Saturn version? I've heard it's worse, but wanted to know why. Okay, so I have both Saturn version and the 32X version of Virtua Fighter. I actually prefer playing the 32X version. I don't know why, because they're almost identical in playstyles, but it's difficult to explain. It's just something about the way it feels I prefer over the Saturn version. Now the real difference is not gameplay, because they're almost identical. The real difference is the Saturn version has some higher quality detail on the stage floors. So for instance, on the 32X version, the stage floor is essentially one great big polygon with some added detail, but not much. Whereas on the Saturn version, the stage floors are actually raised slightly, so they're a 3D platform and they have a lot more detail. Here's a video for comparison. Now the biggest thing with Virtua Fighter, especially on the Saturn, is that there's a remix version available, which is essentially Virtua Fighter using Virtua Fighter 2's engine and graphics engine. So the character models are a lot higher resolution, they're textured, as is the stage floors, and it plays with the lovely fluid Virtua Fighter 2 gameplay engine. So that's generally the more desirable option.
1, ready, go!
But if we're just comparing the standard Virtua Fighter from 32X and Virtua Fighter for Saturn, I prefer the feel of the game on the 32X, but the Saturn version has a little bit more added detail when it comes to the stage floors. So there you go. Now, next question then. So the next question comes from James Bernard, who asks us, am I crazy in thinking that the 32X games used to cost an insane amount to buy? I seem to remember them being like £70 when the device was launched. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a frame of reference here, James, because I bought my 32X well after support for the system had been in full swing. So I've never bought a game at full retail price. So I really don't know, to be honest with you. Okay, last question then. Cyburn asks us, do you think the 32X had an effect on the Sega Saturn's lack of success? No, actually. I would say that the Saturn had its own set of problems. Now, I'm not going to go into detail because nobody needs to hear about how the Saturn renders its polygons in a really bizarre way. But let's put it this way, the Sega Saturn was notoriously difficult to develop for, and that put a lot of developers off. That's why there's not an awful lot of multi-platform releases in regards to PS1 games that also appeared on Sega Saturn. So there you go. Thank you once again to everybody that submitted questions for the show. I really appreciate all the support, and I hope you will come back and submit questions for the next collection video, which should actually be focusing on the Sega Saturn. So if you want to ask questions, follow us on Twitter at SEGADriven, or like us on Facebook, facebook.com/SEGADriven. And when we make the call for questions, please post them out there. So yes, thank you very much. See you next time. Bye.